Since antiquity, Europe and the Mediterranean world has had a great appetite for exotic goods from the East, much of which came from the somewhat vaguely defined region that came to be known as the Indies, which seems to have encompassed pretty much all of South and Southeast Asia. Within the Indies, you have India, which of course refers to the Indian subcontinent, and the East Indies, which refers to roughly what is now Indonesia. And these exotic goods from the East that were so highly sought after included silks from China, pearls and other gemstones, cotton, sugar, Chinese porcelain, dyes such as indigo. The Romans were particularly fond of exotic animals such as elephants, tigers and rhinoceros, both so that they could see them in the circus and so that they could kill them in the arena. But the most prized luxury goods of all were without doubt the spices. I'm talking pepper, cinnamon and cloves from the Indian subcontinent, cassia from China, ginger from Southeast Asia, nutmeg and mace, which actually come from two different parts of the same plant, came all the way from a small group of islands in Indonesia. And I'm not talking Sumatra or Java, I'm talking about the Banda Islands, an archipelago of 10 tiny volcanic specks in the ocean, with a total area of just 46 square kilometres, that were, until the mid-19th century, the only place on Earth where the nutmeg tree thrived. Not for nothing was this archipelago known to Europeans as the Spice Islands. And this is just to name a few of the spices that were said to be literally worth their weight in gold. All of these exotic goods reached the Mediterranean via a network of far-reaching trade routes, the most famous of which is undoubtedly the Silk Road, which was actually several interconnecting trade routes that together formed the overland link across Central Asia to China. From the 5th century, one of the natural European endpoints for this overland trade was Constantinople, or modern Istanbul in Turkey. This was due in part to the fact that Constantinople was by this time the centre of the Roman world and the greatest city in the Mediterranean, but also to the fact that the city was situated at the literal crossroads of Europe and Asia. Various other ports in the historical region known as the Levant, which included what is now Israel, Lebanon, Palestine and parts of Syria, also greatly benefited from their position as endpoints for the overland trade with the East. However, just as goods could reach the West overland, they could also do so by sea. What is sometimes known as the maritime Silk Road connected the Mediterranean world to Asia by way of India, the Red Sea and Egypt. Now, by the 14th century, Christian trade in the Mediterranean was dominated by the various Italian maritime republics, foremost among whom was Venice and Genoa. Goods from Asia would arrive in Constantinople, the Levant and Egypt, and the Italians would then transport them to their respective cities in Italy, where they would then be carried overland into Central and Western Europe and beyond. Unsurprisingly, control over this extremely lucrative trade made these city-states both incredibly wealthy and intensely disliked by those European states that were entirely reliant upon them to satisfy their demand for exotic goods and spices. The Venetians in particular came to dominate the spice trade. Spain, and more pertinently for this story, Portugal, were particularly keen to find an alternative means for accessing the spice trade, and by the 15th century, these two rivals had been pushing each other in a contest to extend their influence down the west coast of Africa. In the middle of the 15th century, this contest was given fresh urgency by events in the eastern Mediterranean. In 1453, the great city of Constantinople finally fell to the Ottoman Turks. This represented not only the final death of the Roman Empire, but also triggered a chain of events that would usher in the dawn of a new period in the history of the world. This was because once they captured Constantinople, the Ottomans effectively severed one of the major overland routes to Asia. Though the spice trade was not cut off altogether, as the other Levantine ports and the maritime trade routes through the Red Sea were still open, the volume was significantly reduced, and what had been expensive before became affordable for only the very wealthiest of European society. As a result, suddenly the race to find a sea route to the Indies began in earnest. Now, by far the most famous of these efforts is without any trace of doubt the 1492 Spanish expedition that was captained by a little-known Genoese sailor by the name of Cristoforo Colombo, known to history as Christopher Columbus, who proposed to reach the Indies by sailing directly west across the Atlantic. Of course, there was just one problem. There were a couple of continents in the way. On a side note, Columbus's initial belief that he had indeed reached the Indies is the reason the indigenous peoples of the Americas were initially referred to as Indians. However, While Spain's eyes were focused westwards across the Atlantic, Portugal instead looked to the south, searching for a way to navigate around Africa to reach Asia from the west. In this regard, King John II of Portugal, an individual posthumously known as the Perfect Prince, and nicknamed by his royal contemporary Queen Isabella of Castile as simply the Man, was particularly determined, and during his reign exploration of the South Atlantic was his main priority. In 1456, Portuguese ships had reached as far south as the Cape Verde Islands, which they subsequently colonised. Soon after that, they reached what is now the Gulf of Guinea. At John II's direction, in the 1480s, Diogo Cao doggedly made his way southwards from Guinea, erecting stone pillars known as padrals along the coast as he went, each one claiming a new discovery for Portugal. And in 1485, he reached what is now Namibia. However, the great breakthrough came in 1488. Bartolomeu Dias was off the coast of what is now Angola when he was blown by a violent storm far out into the Atlantic. At some point soon after, he caught an eastward flowing current that actually took him past the southern tip of Africa. It was only when Dias and his men sighted land to the west that they realised that they had actually rounded Africa, and it was only on the return journey that they discovered a rocky promontory that they aptly named Cape Storm. After their return to Portugal, King John renamed it the Cape of Good Hope. Now you might be thinking, all of this doesn't sound too hard. You just have to keep sailing south until you round the Cape and then you're on your way to India, right? Wrong. In reality, even reaching the Cape of Good Hope was far, far easier said than done.